Hi there, LWT 242 students. This particular PowerPoint is dealing with Chapter 4 in your book, Key Considerations for Teaching these group fitness classes. So in this particular chapter, we're going to look at environmental concerns like, room characteristics, like looking at the flooring and the exercise surfaces, looking at hot and cold environments, appropriate footwear, clothing, equipment, music, methods of monitoring the intensity of the participants in our classes. So we need to have kind of a good understanding of all of these items prior to entering into teaching our group fitness classes. So first of all, looking at just the physical space considerations. So number one, availability of equipment. We need to know what types of equipment is available for us to use inside of our classes. We may have a plan coming into class, but when we get there, find that, half of the steps that we were going to use for our class are no longer in the room or they're not available. So, we need to know ahead of time what equipment do we have available or at our disposal, and how can we make use of that particular equipment. For visibility of the group fitness instructor, normally, the group fitness instructor is at the front of the classroom. And if we can have even something like a raised platform or a stage of some sort to kind of elevate that person up, it's easier for all the participants in our class to view that group fitness instructor. So normally, that's why you see, them on a raised platform or maybe up on a stage of some sort. But normally that person is in the front of the room. They want to be visible for everyone, every participant in that room. Flooring, we want to look at the types of flooring that we're going to be exercising on. So for example, carpeting is definitely not conducive to many forms of group exercise. So for example, if you are teaching a kickboxing class and you need to pivot your foot while you're doing a particular kick, it's harder to pivot on a carpeted surface, and that can produce torque in your knee, and that could lead to an injury on the knee. So, carpeting obviously is not conducive to those types of classes. So we want something that absorbs the shock, that allows for those lateral side-to-side movements without, our foot getting stuck or snagged on something. But we have to look at those types of floorings and make sure that it is conducive to the type of class that we're teaching. Spacing is another concern. We want to definitely have enough space available for that participant to be able to move effectively and do all the exercises that we're expecting them to do. So for example, if you're teaching a step aerobics class, they need to be able to get around the step, because there might be certain moves where you're having them walk all the way around the step in a complete circle. So we need to have that extra space around their spot per se, so they can move and perform each one of those movements that you're asking them to do. Mirrors are always a nice addition to a group fitness studio or a room. And mainly, I like to encourage the participants to utilize the mirrors as form, right? They're not necessarily watching themselves exercise, but they're more looking at their form and making sure that they're performing the exercise appropriately. I know a lot of people are intimidated by mirrors. They don't like to look at themselves in the mirror, but as a group fitness instructor, we can reinforce to them to think of it as, I'm using the mirror to correct my form, to make sure I'm doing this, arm curl exercise the way I'm supposed to be doing it. So, that's always a nice addition, is having those mirrors so they can actually watch the form and make sure they're doing it correctly. Another thing to look at is ventilation, temperature, in the room. Sometimes we don't have control over that. Maybe you're teaching at a facility where, you really don't have control, but it's always nice to have some sort of ventilation system or even larger fans placed throughout the room so that can circulate the air, because sometimes it can get very hot in those rooms. If we can adjust the temperature, maybe down a little bit prior to the start of the class so the room is not so hot when our participants enter. And then also water temperature. If we're teaching aquatic classes, those sometimes range anywhere from 83 to 90 degrees. The higher end, the 90 degree, is more for the mind, body, and even types of classes and even special populations, like those people who have arthritis tend to do better in that warmer temperature water. The lower, the 83, is more for the shallow or the deep water classes or the strength and conditioning classes. And then lastly, access to your lighting, sound controls. You know, there's obviously usually going to be some sort of a sound system at the front of the room, so having access to that, making sure that we cue up our music prior to starting the class, and we can adjust the volume level of our microphone that we're using and the volume level of the music. So these are all just the space, you know, the physical space and things that we should kind of keep in mind to check over prior to the start of class. Next, just looking at environmental considerations. First, just talking about exercising in the heat. Our working muscles do produce a large amount of heat, and the body must regulate our internal temperature by making adjustments in the amount of heat that's lost. So this is also true for exercising both in the heat and the cold. So what I'd like you to do is you're going to watch a video in our course site. If you go back under our week 3 module, you will see a video on actual environmental considerations. So if you take a minute and watch that, it does walk you through some things to think about when exercising in the heat and exercising in the cold. So if you go ahead and pause this, you can go into that week 3 module and just watch that short 5-minute video that talks about those environmental considerations. Also looking at the differences between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, you can see here heat stroke is definitely the one that's going to be life-threatening. It's where we have that elevated core body temperature of greater than 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So as far as how do we respond to these situations, you can see the responses listed over here on the right. But also, if you would go back and read that study under that week 3 module, you will see I also have given you a study on that ACE has actually done on Bikram yoga, and they have a short video on it that's very interesting, and it does talk about exercising in the heat. So if you would just take a few minutes and watch that video as well, that's definitely very, very interesting. As far as fluid intake recommendations, when we are exercising, especially in that heat, you can see general recommendations made by the National Athletic Trainers Association are about 2 hours prior to exercise. We want to drink anywhere from 17 to 20 ounces. Every 10 to 20 minutes during exercise, drink about 7 to 10 ounces. And then following exercise, for every half a kilogram of body weight lost, you're drinking, 450 to 675 milliliters, or 16 to 24 ounces for every pound to make it easier. So general recommendations for fluid intake, not only during exercise, but also replacement after exercise. Other things that we need to think about is our apparel. We should have a good understanding of the appropriate attire to wear when we're instructing a class. Participants, they look at the group fitness instructor as a role model with regards to determining appropriate attire for the class format. So furthermore, we should have knowledge of modality-specific attire. For example, like cycling shorts that can enhance the participant's exercise experience. We also should be able to educate our participants on proper footwear as it pertains to group exercise. So modeling appropriate attire is key. We want to wear things that people can see our form. Sometimes if we have big, baggy clothes on, it's hard to see our joints and the way our body's moving, so that might cause our participants to perform moves incorrectly. So, making sure we're wearing clothing that's appropriate for what we're doing. They can always see, our movements and see how the exercise is performed appropriately. Also, minimizing injury risk. So the use of equipment is prevalent in group fitness. So to minimize the risk of injury among our participants, we should check the equipment regularly for wear and tear. So check for nicks, in tubing, check to make sure there's no breakdown in the equipment. A group fitness instructor should also possess the knowledge of specific equipment or accessories that can make a class more effective and enjoyable for our participants. Furthermore, the misuse of equipment can lead to injury. So it is especially important for a group fitness instructor to learn the intended use, the limitations, and safety precautions for all equipment used in our classes. So checking the equipment for wear and tear, making sure we understand how to use the equipment properly, and demonstrating how to use it properly as well. Also, music. That's another big thing. Some classes are beat driven. They use music as in the forefront and they exercise to the beat of the music. Other classes are non-beat driven. The music is kind of just in the background, but it's not, really in the forefront and in the foreground. So ultimately, all music chosen should contribute to rather than detract from the overall class experience. Instructors who develop a mastery of music understand the importance of coupling music with cueing skills. To ensure the most professional experience, group fitness instructors should purchase legally licensed music, specifically prepared for group fitness classes. So also I've provided a video that I'd like you to watch under week 3 module, using music in group fitness. So there's just a short video that talks about using music, but also reading this short article on music selection will be very helpful as well. So if you'd take a few minutes, pause the video, watch the short video on music selection. But as far as factors to consider when choosing music for your classes, ask your participants, what do they enjoy? What types of music? Is there a genre? Is there a specific type of music that they like to hear? And you can choose your music that way. As far as volume guidelines, OSHA sets the standards. So we want to keep the music level under 85 decibels. And then also, if we're doing beat-driven workouts, we are usually working with the upbeat and the downbeat. The downbeat are actually the strong pulsations, and the upbeat are the weak pulsations. So if you watch that video, you got kind of an introduction to finding the downbeat. So in class, we are going to be doing a lab together that actually is going to help us to find the beat, those strong pulsations, the downbeat, and we're going to work together in class on music. So as far as tempo, how fast, what should our speeds be? You can see the general guidelines and the types of modalities and the types of classes that use those particular tempos. So, 100 to 122 beats per minute you can see are more for the beginner step classes. It's more for the low impact aerobic classes and hip hop. Okay, if they're cycling on the beat and using pedal stroke as a measure of beats per minute, this range represents the upper limit of the music tempo. So then you can see as the speeds increase, the types of classes change as well. So this is just a general guideline. If we're looking beats per minute, what's a common tempo or a common speed that works best for our group fitness classes? So like I said, in class, we're going to work together doing a lab where we have to look at music and identify that downbeat and things like that. So this will be a good lab for us to practice together in class. And one other thing we need to look at is how do we monitor our intensity? We want our participants to have a safe workout with us, but we also want to promote self-responsibility. So ultimately, it is up to the group fitness instructor to choose an intensity monitoring method that's most suitable for their skills and their abilities, as well as one that is most practical for that class setting. So a group fitness instructor must feel comfortable with the method so that its application is simple and easy for our participants to understand. So some of the different methods that we can use to monitor cardiorespiratory endurance or cardiorespiratory exercise when we teach our classes are things like target heart rates. We could use the Carvonen formula. We could try the talk test. We could try the rating of perceived exertion or even the dyspnea scale. Also, if you go back to our week 3, you will see I have another short video on using the talk test in our group fitness classes. So if you would again go ahead and just pause the video and take a minute to watch that short video on talk test. As far as target heart rate and Carvonen method, these are two different ways that sometimes we use to monitor our intensity for cardiorespiratory. These formulas are definitely subject to huge errors in training intensities because the target heart rates are calculated as percentages of predicted max heart rates, which have been shown to have standard deviations of about 12 beats per minute. So using this 220 minus age formula, we tend to see a larger standard estimate of error. Whereas when research is now finding that if we use these target heart rate formulas from Gellish et al., you can see this one's 206.9 minus, we do the math in the parentheses, 0.67 times your age. And then the second one, Tonica, Monahan, and Seals is another one. So between these two formulas, we only see about a 7 beat per minute error. Whereas when we use just the plain old 220 minus age, we tend to see a 10 to 12 beat standard deviation. So in a short nutshell, these two would probably be better to use than the standard 220 minus the age. And then also, looking at the talk test, that's another method of measuring intensity. This takes into account an exerciser's ability to breathe and talk during a workout. So if a person can comfortably answer a question during exercise while still feeling like he or she is getting a good workout, it is likely that the activity being performed is appropriate for cardiorespiratory conditioning. So in a group fitness setting, explaining the Borg 6 to 20 RPE scale to participants is usually difficult. So when we look at the RPE scale, you can see there are two. You've got the Borg scale here that starts with 6 and goes up to 20. And then over here you have the 0 to 10. So a group fitness instructor who uses the 0 to 10 category scale rather than the 6 to 20 will probably fare better in educating the participants about the use of RPE, rating of perceived exertion. So an appropriate intensity range for increasing cardiorespiratory fitness within this 0 to 10 scale is between 3 and a 5. So we want them to feel somewhere between a 3 and a 5 while they're doing exercise. So the RPE scale is another popular method that we use to monitor intensity. And then the last method is the dyspnea scale. So participants can be taught this scale to gauge the appropriateness of breathing performance during class. It is normal for participants engaging in cardiorespiratory exercise to experience mild and even moderate difficulty breathing. But for those suffering from severe difficulty, should be instructed to stop exercising and breathe deeply to recover from intense exercise. A lot of times the dyspnea scale is used more for those folks who suffer things like asthma and those types of breathing conditions. When should we cease exercise? For general warning signs, in most cases it's adequate for the group fitness instructor to make a general statement to the entire class about proper execution of the exercise and how to reduce the intensity through modifications. So if we see things like a breakdown in their form, that's a sign that maybe they're overdoing it. If they can't continue to perform the exercise correctly, there's a breakdown in form, maybe it's time to show a regression, a way to make it easier or even take a break. Labored breathing, excessive sweating, dizziness, those are all warning signs that maybe their intensity is a little too high. Severe signs, when we definitely want to cease exercise and possibly call 911, would be things like chest pain or discomfort, heart palpitations, and that severe musculoskeletal pain. So these definitely would be where we would want to call EMS. So take a minute and think about this. What specific cues could you provide your participants to help them gauge their intensity level during the recovery segment of a high intensity interval training class? So take a minute, pause the video, and write down what you think your answer would be. So in response to this, group fitness instructors can help participants identify their own intensity level by coaching cues such as, we could say things like, during this rest interval, be sure that you can take full deep breaths and respond clearly when I ask you how you're doing. Or we could say something like, before you start your next work effort, be sure that you have caught your breath and that you are focused, willing, and ready to work hard again. If not, take longer of a break so that you can recover. So letting them know that, hey, just because we might begin, but if you're not ready, it doesn't mean you have to start. You can take a longer break. Sometimes those participants need to hear things like that. So this chapter, like I said, basically covered the environmental side of it. So exercising in heat and cold conditions, looking at appropriate apparel, music, how to monitor intensity, and things like that. So in addition to going through this PowerPoint, like I said, I do have quite a few different supplemental materials under the week 3 module that you're going to be not only watching because it's a video, but also reading because it's an article that are going to correspond with everything in that chapter.